Hi there, I'm David Brown, National Campaign Chair of JFNA from Chicago, Illinois. Welcome to the session, 2020, a Catalyst for Reimagining Fundraising Practices. And welcome to the GA. We're excited that through one or more of the sessions, over 10,000 participants will be involved with our General Assembly this year online. And thank you for joining us today. Recordings of the session and all the workshops will be available online after the GA ends. And I hope you join us this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Federation Together plenary. And for me, Federation Together means the power of the collective. How do we fundraise during a crisis? One tried and true strategy includes engaging our stakeholders in emergency campaigns that focus on the urgent needs of our community and that inspire giving. And many of us in many of our communities have been doing exactly that. It's a one go-to approach that works for some of us, but these turbulent times present us with a rare opportunity to look for fresh ways and to look for new opportunities to do some new fundraising opportunities. In the midst of the pandemic, Jewish communal lay and professional leaders must think strategically about new ways to meaningfully engage stakeholders and bring them to invest in our federations. Today, we'll explore the compelling questions and spotlight tried and true practices that are working in many of our federations. You'll leave with a call to action. How can your organization leverage these complex times to reimagine fundraising practices? And I'm pleased today to welcome our speakers for this workshop. First of all, Jeff Rahm and Sophie Herscher from Ignite Action. Abby Feinberg, Annual Campaign Director of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. Mimi Klimberg, Chief Technology and Analytics Officer of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. Bonnie Ryder-Lear, Chief Marketing and Communication Officer at the Greater Miami Federation. And Rabbi Ari Witkin, Director of Leadership Development at the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit. And lastly, but certainly not least, Andrea Wasserman, President of AB Partners, who will be leading today's workshop. Andrea, turning it over to you. Looking forward to today.
Great. I'm not sure. Yes, I think that you guys are able to see me. Unfortunately, I can't see all of you, but I can feel, I could feel you with us. And we're so deeply grateful, David, to you for your leadership, for your energy, and truly for being one of the best openers with walk-up songs possible, even when we have to play jazz. You did a great job for setting sort of the tone and getting our sort of energy going. I'm going to share my screen right now, and we will talk about framework and mindset as a way also to center ourselves so we're present here. So thank you for journeying with us, and let's jump in. As we were planning this session, I came across a wonderful, wonderful framework that I want to share with all of you as a way of getting us warmed up on this Sunday afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. It might be Sunday morning for some of you or Sunday evening for others, to give us a really, really great way to begin to engage in this conversation around reimagining fundraising. So Henry Timms, the CEO of Lincoln Center, writes, "The concrete is wet right now in a way that I've never seen in my career." So we're talking about COVID times. There's a lot more opportunity now to reimagine, which is shifting to become, so Lincoln Center he's talking about is shifting to become more of a civic institution as well as a cultural one. My prediction is in 3 years' time, when we look back at this period, there will be a real difference between those organizations that saw this as just a pause and those organizations who saw this as a chance to reframe their work. So in the absence of being able to see your faces and really communicate with you, just the volume, the many people that are on here aren't conducive for that. I want you to think about zooming out 3 years from now, when you and the community look back and really characterize how your organization has shown up in this time? Will it look like a pause? Will it look like a reframe, especially around your fundraising practices? And equally important, as you go through this session with us and as you engage in your activities, how might you use your agency, use your skills, your talent, your vision, and really bring about a reframe and a revitalization? So with our centering done, let's jump into our purpose. We must always begin our in-person gatherings as well as our virtual gatherings with our purpose, and to the extent that we can, really stay focused on our purpose. For today, there's a duality to our purpose. We are not just looking at how do we convene virtually. There is a proliferation of convenings virtually. The critical question that we as organizations and as a collective, as a community, a Jewish communal enterprise must ask ourselves is, how are we not only engaging meaningfully with our stakeholders, but how are we harnessing the potential of technology and the virtual arena to inspire and compel donors to give? So that additive fundraising piece is really a brave new world. If anybody tells you that they have the secret, bullets over there, the secret weapons, they're not telling you the truth. We are in ideation, iteration, experimentation, and that's what we're going to look at today. So in terms of learning objectives, they're threefold for us. One is we're going to zoom out and look at the philanthropic landscape so we could get a better sense of where we're located in terms of our philanthropic practice today. And we're going to just remind ourselves that the essentials of our fundraising practice matter now more than ever. COVID, no COVID. Virtual platform, no virtual platform. We cannot abandon what makes us successful, truly successful, in donor relationship practice. We will then zoom in and take a look at how do we harness the technology and the virtual platform in order to do our essentials even better in these times, because these are interesting times and these times are not over, and we may even carry some of what we learn and pilot into future. And then finally, I just want to say a word about spectators and practitioners. The critical component over here for us during this next hour or so is to not only be exceptional spectators and really listen and absorb, but we need to overcome the challenge of a webinar. A webinar in this context is the perfect platform for this kind of engagement because there are just so many people who are eager to engage and learn with us today. However, we have to resist the temptation to zone out and just be a spectator. So what I offer over here in terms of how do you work with us, with the panelists and myself, in order to be more than a spectator, but also the practitioners that you are, in relation to what you're hearing. So I want you to really think about virtual convenings, or how might you use digital tools to aid in your fundraising. More specifically, are there programs or ideas that you're thinking about, that you're working on? How can you apply what you're learning to your particulars? And we will constantly try to bring it back to not only what's going on inside the inner workings of the communities and the organizations that we're going to spotlight, but we will do our best to relate it to a broader based practice. So with that said, let's go back in time, March 2020, the compelling question on the minds of every single one of my clients and every friend and colleague that's in the business of fundraising, to ask or not to ask, what is the right response to this? And nobody really could have read the tea leaves at that moment. We all were sitting with, oh my God, what is this tsunami? What are we going to do? How are we going to work? This is very confusing. This is very overwhelming. And there are compelling needs that we need to meet through a robust fundraising practice. So what I and many of my colleagues did, we just went back to sort of history and looked at the trajectory of 40 years to see through highs and lows in the economy, did the philanthropic sector ever once fall off that fiscal cliff? Now, I don't want to be tone deaf because I know that each of us have been dealing with our own respective challenges as it relates to fundraising and everything else. But if you saw from that graph, there is not one moment in time over the 40-year trajectory that the philanthropic sector fell off that proverbial fiscal cliff. And more than that, what we started to sort of talk about, and John Pepperdine from MPW Strategies really gave some great guidance over here that I know many of us have been following successfully, is biggest recessions, there are donors that are capable, right? Capable and wanting and eager to help. Stay close, inform them, keep them abreast of what's going on, ask for help, ask for guidance. Many of you have done that very successfully. In addition to that, be sure to lead, not tone deaf, lead with how can we help you? Are you going through something that our organization is uniquely qualified to be there for you? So stay close and be authentic and keep the lines of communication open. So with that, it's almost 9 months later, and I think it's pretty cool and exciting to say that crisis really has signaled fertile ground for fundraising. It has signaled challenges for sure. And also we have seen some real epic fundraising that has happened. The Jewish Federation system alone, through COVID relief efforts, raised hundreds of millions of dollars around this from the generosity of the community. In October 6, 2020, Dan Parks of the Chronicle of Philanthropy writes, crisis charitable commitment pledges climbed nearly $3 million. And then the Fundraising Transformation Project reports that charitable giving in the first half of 2020, we've seen a 7.5% increase of giving among donors under the a level of $250, donors who give $250 or below. So there's lots of example of this kind of fertile ground. If we were together, I would ask you to raise your hands and share some of your success stories with us. Very important to honor and celebrate all that's going well in the midst of really what we know is tremendous challenge. So with that, and knowing that there is fertile ground and there is some silver linings in what we're going through right now, I don't want to minimize the challenge as we gear up, and as I sometimes write about, reaching into sort of that internal reservoir, to find the resiliency in order to gear up for the next stage of our fundraising practice. And I call attention to the investigative work that I did in preparation for this session of what is working out there right now in terms of the essential fundraising practices that I want you to briefly go through this list with me. And on the practitioner side of the equation, I want you to be self-auditing. How are you and your organization doing in these key practices? Number one, biggest donors. We know, not everybody, but many, if not most of our biggest donors are actually doing quite well financially right now. Many of them with the philanthropic muscle and philanthropic inclination want to do more. They want to help. They want to engage. They have given generously to urgency of the day. They also are eager to be inspired. What messaging, what are you bringing to them that really speaks to not only urgency and stability, but what about revitalization? What about moving forward? The second area that I want to make sure that you're paying close attention to, many of your donors, broad-based donors, stepped up and gave early on. It is okay. It is okay to consider going back to those donors for recurring gifts. That is skyrocketing. That is up right now. Optimizing days of giving, organizing your giving around a key focus. In addition to that, many of you and many outside in the general philanthropic community are reporting record attendance in terms of your virtual gatherings. If you don't apply intentionality around canvassing and knowing who is showing up to your virtual programs, you're missing a golden pipeline development opportunity to augment your base of donors. This is a wonderful opportunity also to engage and inspire your board members and other lay leaders and volunteers in really helping you to know who's showing up to your virtual encounters. And I would say if you're not approaching that with intentionality, go back and take a look at it. And finally, before we get to our spotlight, I do want to make sure that you're getting the memo that there is a spike in will creation and bequests. So we should absolutely not shy away from calling the question about how do we augment legacy giving right now, because that is another area for us to look at. Okay, so with that, we are going to get to the part of our conversation where we are going to converse. We're going to talk to a phenomenal lineup of panelists. And you see over here these great headshots. So I see, great, photographs. And in addition to that, I see people that I admire greatly. And I want to call attention to the fact, and this is kind of interesting, and I think it's emblematic of this virtual practice that we are developing collectively. Some of these people have a background and a strong background in development practice, and others do not. And what this signals to me is if you're a practitioner, lay professional, working on the fundraising agenda in your organization, and you are not reaching throughout your organization to find the superpowers of your colleagues in order to make this an organization-wide imperative, like you're going to hear from Miami, like organization-wide imperative fundraising, come one, come all. You should be looking at building your capacity through tapping into the talents of your colleagues. We have marketing professionals here. We have development professionals here. We have IT professionals here. We have a rabbi here who brings spiritual guidance to all here. We have a lot to offer. So let's keep going. Okay, spotlights, one word or two words on spotlight. What we are not presenting over here is a perfect wrapped up, tied in a bow gift to you and say, one size fits all, go and press the easy button and get to work on your virtual compelling events that you're going to raise millions and millions of dollars. What we are saying is right now in October 2020, a spotlight on the virtual gatherings that compel donors to give is very much in nascent stage. And what we're spotlighting is entrepreneurial ethos and practice, intrapreneurial ethos and practice, organizations and people who are willing to beta test and pilot and learn from successes and learn from things that didn't go as well as we want them to go. So the key message over here is not is for you to jump in to this conversation and help to co-create this practice that we are all learning together. We'll take a look at digital fundraising tools. We'll take a look at how to use sort of the technology and the new platforms for micro gatherings, for those parlor meetings that we have that help us to fundraise. And we're going to take a look at fundraising via ballroom, via gala in just a few moments. So with that, I am going to stop sharing, and I would love for my colleagues from Ignite Action to jump in, and let's get into conversation over here. All right, Jeff Rum, Sophie Herscher, my partners in crime, and you have been with me through many, well, Jeff in particular, through many decades, even though we're still quite young. And I just recall, Jeff, conversation like 100 years ago, maybe 20, where you were talking about all of these like really cool things in like the digital arena, and how do nonprofits really help to enhance their fundraising practice and their impact through technology. And I remember you talking about search engine optimization, and I remember you talking about, oh, what about the user experience? And I was like, I'm so glad that there are people like Jeff Rum and Sophie out there that actually think about these things, because I'm just going to go have lunch with a major donor right now. And like, where do these two intersect? And now we find ourselves in 2020 and we're all virtual right now. And now more than ever, all those questions that you have called and you have been architecting and you've been experimenting with, I actually, like, you really have been paying attention to this field more than most people I know. So Jeff Rum, and also just make sure you unmute yourself. Can you just tell us, like, from where you sit with, your company and with your practice, what is going on out there in the nonprofit arena in terms of what our colleagues are thinking about, are doing in, figuring out their strategy to meld excellent fundraising practice with the best that fundraising platform and technology has to offer? And if you could address the question, not just from the big legacy organizations, but just sort of the small, the medium, just run the gamut. What are you seeing and how should we be thinking about this right now?
Sure. Thanks, Andrea. First of all, this is a very important conversation, so I appreciate you inviting us to speak. And speaking of virtual events, I really want to give credit to JFNA for creating this type of experience, which is open and accessible to everyone. And I think, we always talk about building community, and I think this is the start of how you do it. And I'm not in Mitzpah Ramon, but this background image is from my last Federation trip. And it kind of gets me in the spiritual zone of what we're doing here this week. So look, when we start to plan for any type of virtual experience or virtual event, I think there are two main things to keep in mind. First, and you said this at the start, Andrea, there's no perfect platform, right? Right now, it's kind of like the Wild West out there. I don't know if everyone remembers when social media was first starting, but MySpace and when Facebook was starting, it was kind of like a mess. And I think we're still kind of in that world where we're figuring things out. But the second and the most exciting part is that the creativity is infinite, right? There's so much opportunity out there to create awesome content. So I want to just mention three different elements that I think people can think about and take back with them. The first is that digital fundraising platforms are simply tools, right? They're tools in a toolbox. It's technology, it's transactional, it's everything we were taught in the Jewish world to stay away from, right? Fundraising in the Jewish world, in the Jewish community, in the Federation world, it's an art. It's about emotion, it's about feelings, it's about being together, it's about shared experiences and shared values. It's relational, it's about gathering, it's about people. So we have to remember that the platform should be the last question we ask about. So we have used a very simple concept here. It's nothing groundbreaking, but we always ask three things. What are the goals? What is the content strategy? And then finally, what is the right platform to achieve that? So it really just means that you won't actually know what you need from a platform until you know what kind of experience you want to prepare or what kind of event you want to have. So I'll share one story. It's not a nonprofit story, but I think it's relevant. About 7 or 8 years ago, I was leading an account for a very large global beverage brand that we all know of. And I went into the headquarters and we were sitting down at a boardroom table and I was meeting with their brand team and they said, we really want to create a Facebook experience. This was 8 years ago when like Facebook fan pages were really, really big. Everyone wanted to capture followers. And I said to them, why? And they said, because we want to build up our Facebook experience. And I said, why? And they said, well, we want more people to follow us. And I said, why? And they said, well, we want to make sure the product gets in the hands of our potential customers. I said, aha. Eddie Murphy does it better than I do. But the real goal is that you want to get the products in the hands of your customers. So instead of a Facebook campaign, we ended that meeting with them sending out 80,000 products in the mail using targeted segmented audience identification. And it cost 50 cents per mailing. And then we asked people when they get the products in the mail, if they like it, post a picture or a video on Facebook and tag the brand. And the experience was incredible. And the content was great. It was user generated, it was authentic, it was the right audience. And the result was a steep increase in sales. So why am I telling you this story? Because it's the same in the nonprofit world, right? You want to get your product in the hands of your donors. and your potential donors. So we want to invest in engaging content, inspiring content, and we want to make people feel seen and heard in the community. So you can consider what you can do in the lead up to the event or the virtual fundraiser that will make people feel part of the experience. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was the platform selection. People say they're zoomed out. I hear that a lot. Oh, we're just zoomed out. The truth is, I think, based on our experience, that they're actually zoomed out from mediocre content, right? There's a lot of content out there, and a lot of it's just kind of meh, right? So we know that people, after they're zoomed out, are still watching Netflix at night. They're still looking at the screen. So what we do know is that Zoom is the reliable player right now, right? So if you add up all of the value of all the major US airlines, Delta, American Airlines, United, Air France, Southwest, Lufthansa, and others, it's not even equal to the value of Zoom communications right now, which is worth about $50 billion. So why do I tell you this? It's because it's a reliable service. It's what we're using right now. There are a lot of shiny objects out there, companies that are trying to break through and create kind of creative, new, innovative things going on. And some of them are great, but I always, about 85 to 90% of the time, when we're working with clients who want to have virtual experiences, we always wind up falling back on Zoom because it actually can do a lot of what we want it to do. So I think it's important to think about the goals, think about the content, and then finally, then you can choose the platform, if that makes sense.
Beautiful, thank you. And also not to minimize the imagination, because some of this also is like the hurdle for us to take. Again, going from like, okay, I'm gonna go have my lunch with my major donor. How in the world am I going to do what Jeff Rum does? You know, and some of this is, you know, that not shown moment, that bold move into the unknown and going with it. So with that in mind, Sophie, you are one of the boldest people that I know. You hold my hand on the most basic tasks, and you also inspire me, not only with your you know, proficiency in the functionality and the technical side of all that you and Ignite Action do, but also you have this like keen ability and this unique ability to understand how to position organizations and people's brands, and also to really weave in cogent messaging. You know, so how, like, can you guide us or advise us on how we might think about the marriage, you know, between sort of the technology, you know, platform and our need to really compel and excite and inspire our donors and our prospects to want to engage with us and want to give to us?
Well, first of all, thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. So I would say that there are really three things that I want to say on this subject. The first is that the most important thing that we have found when trying to create messaging that not just raises money, but it creates a new pipeline, it brings in new donors, it creates lifetime value and lifetime relationships. The most important thing is focusing on a concept called ultimate concern. And ultimate concern is actually a concept that comes out of academia. And the idea is ultimate concern does not mean goal of the organization. It does not mean how much money you have to raise, right? Nonprofits, we have a fundraising imperative. There is a number that's associated with many of these events, and it's okay. You have to set that goal, as Jeff said. You do have to know what you want to achieve with this event specifically. But the audience that attends the event is made up of people who don't care if you hit a specific amount of money. That's not why they are attending the event. They have a concern that's drawing them in. I'll give you an example. We have a client that works on compelling Jewish education. Their imperative is to elevate the field of Jewish education in North America. Their donors are not necessarily people who are receiving or creating Jewish education. That's not their ultimate concern. When we did a survey and a series of interviews with people who give tremendous amounts of money to this organization, they didn't say, I really care about Jewish education. They said, I really care about a thriving Jewish future. I care that young people have quality, engaging, inspirational moments of connection to Jewish identity, to Jewish tradition, to Jewish food. That's what I care about. So we went back to them and we said, when you tell your story, it is much, much more important that your donors see those children. They see those teenagers. They hear the stories of those who have lived through tremendous, impactful Jewish education and came out closer and more connected and more empowered as Jewish individuals because of that. So instead of showcasing the programs, we showcased the participants. So that was a shift. And I would say that across the board, that is the number one shift that we work on with our clients, focusing on the ultimate concern of the people who are attending your events and making sure that all of the stories that you tell are connected to that person's desire to achieve a certain impact in the world. So what does that mean in terms of platform and practice and sort of living on the ground? It means if you have an opportunity to plan an event where you have some mixture of pre-recorded and live content, think about who you're featuring. Think about who your MC is, your host. Who's going to be the person who sets the mood, who helps everyone feel connected to someone, to a voice, to a face, to a person. That person should be someone who's connected to the impact, the ultimate concern of the viewer, not necessarily the organization itself. And this can be challenging because I think we all have a tendency to want to engage our existing stakeholders, like our board members or our staff. And that's not always the right strategic move in terms of the ultimate concern of the audience, because it's very likely that many of your donors don't know your board members personally. They won't have a natural human connection to that person on the screen, where they may have a more natural, easier human connection to a recipient of the work of the organization that they feel personally invested in because it was partly their contribution that helped that person have that experience. So it's really about planning all of your content to engage that and then using the functionality of the platform to elevate those types of stories.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you so much. And so, what I want to do is again, going back to sort of the slide on spectator and practitioner, for now, what I would want you to be asking yourself, if you're not already, is sort of what might the ultimate concern, right, of your target audience be? It could be multiple audiences. And then what stories do you need to tell? What visuals do you need to showcase in order to compel and inspire? Engagement, excitement, and giving. Sophie, did I cut you off?
I was just going to say one last thing, which is that one really, really important thing about this is to focus on individual stories. So not aggregated stories of 900,000 this and 400,000 that, but allowing people to see the impact on one particular individual is actually much, much more valuable in terms of creating an emotional connection, which then gets encoded in your brain with a rush of dopamine that allows things to be remembered more clearly and encoded more deeply as emotion rather than a memory that's based on intellect or intelligence.
Wow. Powerful stuff for a Sunday afternoon, dopamine and visuals and whatnot. Thank you so much, Sophie, for sharing with that. And Leah, I just want to recognize and acknowledge that somebody has raised their hand, and under normal circumstances, we would never ignore a raised hand. We're very excited that there are raised hands. And there are lots of raised hands. So that tells us, okay, we need to organize more of these kind of sessions because we have so much content to get through that we're not going to be able to get to all these questions. So keep raising your hand and write your questions in the Q&A function, and we will circle back and get back in touch to make sure that we get to answer your questions. Jeff, take us home right now, okay? Or Sophie, both of you together. Right. What do we want to tell? What do we want to leave sort of for now our colleagues with in terms of, the essentials? What should they be thinking about in terms of next steps in order to, really, really do this kind of work well?
Sure. So first of all, thank you again for having us. Sophie and I created a resource specifically for this group, the people attending this session. So we'll share it in just a minute. But just to review what I mentioned earlier and what Sophie was alluding to, number one, really start with your goals and not the tactics. I think when you start with the platform, you're going to make it much more transactional of an experience than if you actually start with the goals and the ultimate concern. And number two, I would say attend virtual programs, attend virtual events in the Jewish community, outside the Jewish community, find out what's working, what's not working, what you like, what you don't like, and then go out and find great producers of content. It ultimately comes down to the content, right? I remember once I listened to, this was years ago, at through Federation, a conference call, it was back in the conference call days, with Avram Infeld, and he was in Jerusalem, and the phone line was really scratchy and you could barely hear him, but it was actually one of the most inspiring calls that I had been on because the content was so good. So I would really focus on finding people who can help you create good content. And as I said, it's kind of like the Wild West out there right now. There's some great platforms. We're happy to share with you some. And then there are a lot that are just kind of like getting their feet wet, and you should be aware of those as well. I'm going to put up I'll share my screen. Hopefully this works. This is a resource that we created. Does everyone see that?
No, it hasn't come through, Jeff.
Okay, I don't think it says my sharing is paused.
Yeah.
But I'll give you the link, Andrea, and you can share it out.
Sure.
But if you go to igniteaction.co/fed, that's FED.
And Lizzie just put it in the
.co/fed. Let me try sharing one more time, see if it works. Okay, is that working now?
No, but Lindsay put in the she gave sort of a signal
Perfect.
to everybody.
We put something together that hopefully is helpful to everyone. If you have questions, feel free to follow up with me or Sophie. It's just been a real pleasure to at least start this conversation. This is just the beginning, and there's a lot out there to really think about. So hopefully what we put on the website were really like 25 questions you can start asking as an organization that ultimately will help you figure out what the right technology, platform, and tools are to execute.
Great. Well, thank you, team from Ignite Action. We love you and we appreciate you. And thank you for helping to further the field and the practice, and more to follow. That was a great appetizer. I'm feeling, really satiated and now hungry to sort of go on to the next spotlight. And so is Rabbi Ari Wicken. And yes, hi Ari. So good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us from Detroit. With Ignite Action with Jeff and Sophie, we wanted to paint sort of broad-based strokes in terms of getting sort of the landscape of the digital arena, fundraising platforms and whatnot. And now we're getting into a little bit more, we're peering into, it's a sneak peek, it's an invitation into actual organizations that have, like all of us, have some real challenges and real opportunities as it relates to donor engagement around fundraising that normally would take place in person, but we're not doing that right now. And yet the show must go on. We still need to engage, we still need to educate, we still need to inspire, and we still need to fundraise. So before we jump into the conversation with Ari, I want to set the tone for this. And just read you something that Jamie Metzel wrote about the seven essentials for thriving in our new world of social distance, okay? So just so we don't forget, our deep human need for intimate physical connectivity with others is coded in our DNA, okay? That deep social interconnectivity was central to our ancestors' competitive success. So when I read this, I said to myself, my God, right? Isn't this like the Jewish communal enterprise superpower? Which then leads me to ask, like, okay, organizations, okay, people, okay, colleagues, like, how are you, or are you leveraging one of the superpowers, one of the greatest assets, our ability, our code to connect socially? How are you leveraging that for greater good in the world to advance your organizations? And the Jewish community, the Jewish Federation of Detroit, does this extraordinarily well. And so with that, Ari, I'd love for you to share with us a bit of what was the catalyst, and the challenge, the opportunity behind you organizing, convening with your colleagues and your leadership around a high level, epic virtual parlor meeting where you guys did some really, really impressive fundraising. If you could just kind of take us back in time and share with us, what were you confronting at that time where you had to pivot, you needed to figure something else out?
So first, Andrea, thank you again so much for having us and allowing us to share a little bit about what we're doing in Detroit. And I want to start by saying that I'm here to talk about what we're doing, but this effort is really led and championed by a team of fundraising professionals who are top notch. And a particular shout out to our leader, Lisa Cutler, who really pioneered this event. So annually in Detroit, and I'm a relatively new Detroiter, so I'm still, like brimming with excitement about how successful this community is at doing what it does. Annually we host a special event for our highest level donors. It's called the Fisher Meeting in honor of Max Fisher. And that is an intimate evening dinner experience where our highest level donors publicly share about their gifts for the coming campaign year. It's a really important event. It's a backbone event of our community's ability to leverage the bulk of our philanthropic effort to support our agencies and the social service needs across our community. And we knew that this event was super important to maintain. And I think we went into the year, and our campaign chairs and our staff really with a desire to figure out, can we do this in person? Because there's an intimacy that we wanted to capture. What's interesting is, a few months later after the event, what we found and the feedback we got from a number of people was they actually felt like the virtual format provided a layer of intimacy that they hadn't experienced before. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One is the physical event was limited in its capacity to the size of a space. This is a dinner normally hosted in someone's home. And while it's a relatively large space, we weren't able to include broader family members. So something we saw this year that I thought was really a fantastic decision that our leadership made early on was to invite the next generation. So families who are announcing their gifts, turning over the microphone to their kids in their 20s and 30s who normally wouldn't have the opportunity to join in this space and to come be inspired by their parents and their parents' peers and see what the mantle of philanthropic commitment that they're picking up on really is. And so that brought in the impact, I think, of the experience. And I know all of us in the philanthropic world and those of us who do fundraising are constantly thinking about how do we look at the next generation of inheritors of generational philanthropic commitment? And how do we maintain their connection to our federations and our communities as the world expands and their interests expand? And I think this was a really phenomenal way to do that. And secondly, I think some of our success came by sort of exactly what Jeff was talking about, using a platform that worked for people. I think, you can imagine all of the different platforms that Jeff and Sophie were talking about, and we wanted to lower the bar to entry. This group in particular has people who are really tech savvy and some for whom this is a relatively new experience. And we captured, I think, the energy of the Zoom programming we'd been doing communally, and we're able to use that familiarity in a productive way. And in particular, for no reason other than I like Zoom, and I think I saw that Ray Ringel was a participant in this. Before I knew this was going to happen, Ray had a Zoom facilitation class that I took because I was going to be doing a program with Israelis and on Zoom. All of a sudden, now I'm using those skills every day. And what I found was by having a familiar face, a lot of our people had been on programs where I was if you have questions, chat to Ari and he'll help you. So a lot of the people at this gathering, at the Fisher meeting, already knew like, oh, I can text Ari if I have a question about the Zoom platform. And really, I can't stress enough lowering that barrier being important. And I'll just say one more thing. I know I'm going on. I'm sure you have other questions, Andrea, that we didn't just send out an invitation to log on to a Zoom. These are high-level donors who have personal relationships with our philanthropic staff. And not one of them just responded to an email to come to this, but everyone had had 1, 2, 3, multiple phone calls, or maybe even socially distanced in-person meetings with their Federation professional that they're close with or have a relationship with to prepare them for this. So we knew that there were certain people who would have an extra question, or who said, how do I make sure that my kid who's going to be calling in from their college dorm room gets on? Or how do I make sure that I can turn my microphone on? I've never been on a Zoom before. That we really stewarded people into this so that they could have the most profound, productive, and empowering experience possible.
Ari, I love it. And I love the point that's coming up right now. We as fundraisers, we're always looking for meaningful ways to steward donors and, meaningful touch points. And I feel like almost in this new world that we're in, the very act of shepherding and moving and helping a donor or a prospective donor through the 21st century process of convening and coming online, it becomes a touch point and a stewardship moment and a forever grateful. Thank you for bridging this world for me, donor manager or relationship manager, and really helping me to participate in the community in ways that I might not feel that confident and comfortable doing. The other thing I want to say is the intergenerational component over here, that all of our participants, representing, myriad organizations, have this opportunity right now of sort of the donor and then the next generation, and how this sort of virtual platform becomes a low barrier or a lower barrier for engagement. I'm just curious, did all of the participants reside in Detroit, or were you guys going across the country with this?
So for this specific event, the majority of our participants reside in Detroit, although many of them now who are inviting their children to participate with them, of course, like many of our families we spread out. So we had people whose kids were calling in from all over the country. And of course, we also have a few donors who have a special connection to Detroit, but maybe don't currently reside here for one reason or another. Some people representing, family endowments where they have moved on, but they give still in their parents' name one way or another. I think though, Andrea, you hit on the stewardship point, which to me, I think it's easy to get caught up in the complexity of our new virtual social distanced reality, but the basis of fundraising, which is relationships, is really the same. I wouldn't invite a donor who I know is a Shomer Kashrut or Shomer Shabbat to have a meeting with me in a non-kosher restaurant on Saturday afternoon. I would never do that. Similarly, I wouldn't invite someone to a virtual meeting if I don't think that they are going to be able to access the platform. I would never, I want to know who my people are and be building those relationships constantly. And I think all of us spend a lot of time focusing on that in the major donor category. But we in Detroit, and I think our colleagues around the country, are also thinking about how to do that with the community campaign and with as many people as possible. And I'm really proud that we launched a community campaign phone call tree where we called thousands of community members in Detroit, not to ask them for money, but just to say, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? Like, Jeff and Sophie hit on this as well, and you hit on this in your opening remarks, that we're in a new world and we don't totally know where everybody's at. Some people are doing financially really well, actually, in this strange moment in time, and others are really hurting, and the equation isn't always obvious. So the ability to connect to people and say, Federation, we're a central address for convening our community, for supporting our institutions, and each and every family and individual. That means we also have to call and check in. I wrote about that actually in E-Jewish Philanthropy at the very beginning of the pandemic, like March 14th or something, said, here's an opportunity when we're not having so many meetings every day. Let's call and just say hello to as many people as possible. And I think that's been a really, really powerful tool for us here in Detroit.
Beautiful. And I think also, thank you so much, Ari, for sharing that with us and for allowing us to peer into the work that you guys are doing on sort of a high level, with your most major donors, but then also how all of this is actually pervading and entering into your strategy for your broad base and your community, engagement. And just going back to what Sophie was saying, sort of ultimate concern, right? There's an ultimate concern first and foremost for the donor, for the constituent. How are you doing? What's going on? And then also figuring out what is their ultimate concern for the future vitality of the community, and how do we showcase and message all of that in this virtual world. So Ari, thank you very much. I'm going to move us along just because I want to
Thank
be
you very much.
mindful of the time. And here is what I want to do is I want to pivot to our next segment and our final segment. And I think it's time for like some content and some video and how the Jewish Federation of Greater Miami really pulled together what I think is going to be, one of the most famous, initiatives, let's just say, of 2020 and beyond, because in true form, Miami Federation, with the really incredible leadership of the CEO, Jacob Solomon, the board chair, the board leadership, Jeff Levine, who runs the development operation, and the entire organization really like locked arms and got into how are we going to keep the show and the engine and the train moving forward in this virtual world. So before we jump into what actually went on this past week in terms of a virtual ballroom, luncheon, amazing, I just want to share with you one of their really powerful pieces that they used in order to inspire their donors. And again, think about ultimate concern when you watch this. Okay, so can we just show the Vanessa video?
There is no future without our past of resilience as we wandered 40 years in the desert to the promised land, ran over shattered glass on Kristallnacht, linked arms and raised arms against the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto. There is no future without our past. Community is our foundation. Tradition is our blueprint. We huddle together under chuppahs and in minyans, squeeze in extra chairs at long Seder tables, hide the afikomen under cushions for restless children. When faced with an isolating pandemic, we host virtual Shabbat services, teach grandmothers how to Zoom, bring the Greater Miami Jewish Federation Women's Event to your living room. Unwavering in our unity and commitment to action, our chain of tradition remains unbroken. We are the people who show up in celebration and in grief, embracing each other at Shiva, folding prayers in the nooks of the Kotel, reciting the mourner's Kaddish with congregation, weeping for our brothers and sisters slain in sanctuaries in Pittsburgh, in San Diego, in too many places, simply because we are Jews. Our descendants are women of valor, commanding the courage of Queen Esther, the vision of Golda Meir, the tenacity of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We make it our duty to rise to the occasion. Simply put, we are women who get the job done. There is no future without our past. From Eastern Europe to North Africa to India and Ethiopia, the Jews are and have always been a kaleidoscope of diversity. Black, brown, and white, Saftas, Abuelas, and Bubbies, Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahi, with 100 different ways to make charoset. We rock curly hair, afros, blonde hair, and shadel hair. We are Jews by birth, Jews by choice, Jews that believe love is love, Jews that question and debate, Jews that share a visceral bond, despite our many differences. Meet my daughter, Ariella Mirai Hila Arias, the challah-eating, platano-loving, chutzpah-having lioness of God, Juminicana. She is our future. There is no future without our past. Despite exile and persecution, we never abandoned our culture and faith. I am so proud of my people, a people who dared to be different, a people who against all odds are here to stay. And if someone tells you you don't look like or act like your people, impossible, because you are your people. You just tell them they don't look, period.
Okay. All right. Where are my people? Where are my Miami people? Okay. And is Abby, I don't know, Abby, you can also share your, is Abby here also? Okay.
I'm here.
Oh, yay, there you are. Okay, wonderful. Yay, yay, yay. Okay, so everybody, a collective hug, a virtual hug for the Miami team, the entire organization just finished, what has been a labor of love, experimentation, iteration. I mean, everything that you can hope for and want. And they were so gracious in inviting me in to really peer at the process of this program that was birthed. So it is not surprising when you see this kind of compelling narrative come to life in front of you when you meet this extraordinary team and the commitment and the expertise. And I just have to say that we're very fortunate to learn about this sort of virtual engagement that leads to compelling fundraising. I'm going to introduce first Bonnie. Bonnie Ryder actually has been with the Federation for a long part of her career, and she wears many hats, and her background actually is in production and broadcasting and storytelling and communications and so a lot of what we're going to learn right now, and this is going to sort of take us into the home stretch of our session today as an appetizer, we're going to learn about how you not only do the compelling sort of storytelling and the positioning and the organizational priming that needs to go on, along with what you have from Abby and Jeff Levine and the whole sort of campaign team in terms of the campaign program and the essentials to really drive exceptional fundraising. So Bonnie, can you just briefly, where were you guys in March 2020 when you were seeing what was going on, and what did Miami do? What was the process, and how did you prepare and get to the point of execution?
So Miami is very much an event community. It's always been a very, very strong part of our annual effort. And we realized early on that virtual events were going to have to be the way that we were going to go. And so we worked really, really hard to come up with a whole strategy around it, which focused on content development, securing the right technology, and most importantly, putting in the right fundraising practices, because we realized that while it's so exciting in this world to be creating amazing content, none of us, while we're all now pivoting to the world of broadcasting, and make no mistake about it, we are all now in some way or another in the broadcast business. We're not in the world of only producing television shows. And so what that really means is that we have to find ways to effectively marry the online event and content with the offline best practices for donor development that really have to work together. So as a result of that, Miami put together a very strong, dedicated team that included marketing communications, fundraising, technology, and our planning department, which was instrumental in helping us find those moments, those stories that we can then turn into great content. What we wanted to do from the beginning was really try and create a sense of normalcy in this really abnormal world. And so we said, what are the things that we must do virtually? And then what are the things, our true north was what are the things that we need to build into this plan that would allow for the things that we know well and that our volunteers, leadership, and donors know well. And that's recruitment, work around solicitation, work around corporate sponsorship recognition, getting people to connect individually peer-to-peer, while at the same time running that parallel course of saying, what do we need to do in the virtual space? And with that, we really set out to take on a very big challenge, and that is we did our women's event online. And we actually had more than 1,000 women sign on, created a virtual platform that allowed for engagement in a table environment, working in our technology area. And you'll hear more from Abby later a little bit about pledge cards that were virtual and all kinds of stuff. And then once we made that decision, we worked very, very hard on our organizational readiness, training and testing, and getting the whole organization ready for what we knew was going to be an enormous shift in how we did business and how our donors and leadership engaged with us. I'm not tone deaf, as you said, Andrea, to the fact that there are people watching us right now who don't have the capacity for the size of Miami. But my hope is by the time Abby and I are done, that there will be nuggets of takeaways that they can incorporate in their thinking and push themselves, push the organization, push the envelope to try and do things that are definitely scary, bold, and very brave. And so our event, as you said, was just this past Thursday. We're still evaluating the wins and where we might need to adjust. We're trying very much to be a learning organization. We know that this is an evolving area for the most part. Our donors are and have been in our first putting our toe in the water on Thursday, very forgiving of challenges that we may have had, very respectful of the heavy lift that we undertook and how audacious it was, and really applauding us for the innovation and the effort. On the platform side, we did use a brand new platform. We had some amazing experiences on the broadcasting side. We had some challenges on the user experience side, a few on the technology side. We're evaluating everything, but overall, it was a huge win for Miami, which tends to be a brave community, the home of where the lion was born.
Amazing. That's great. Bonnie, thank you so much. And again, it's sort of, legacy organization, reinventing the way that it works, and fertile ground. These times are fertile ground to do what we're all thinking about, but they have taken a step. And I just will say that so gracious and generous that the learning and the work that they did, I have never met like a group of people that are so open to teaching and helping to elevate the field. So this, again, appetizer. Let's take a deep breath, and now let's focus. Abby. Okay, so passionate about pledge cards. One of the big questions now that's coming up over and over is, okay, like how do we actually codify and anchor and ground the fundraising in our virtual programs? And Miami dared to do what we're all asking. Can you talk a bit about, the integration between the technology, the data, and good solid fundraising strategy, and share with us, how does this happen and what did you produce?
Absolutely. And thank you so much.
In 2 seconds or less.
2 seconds or less. Okay. So I'm actually speaking on behalf of our Chief Technology Officer, Mimi Klimberg, who couldn't be here today, but that shows our collaboration, that a development person could actually answer some technology questions. And we really worked hand in hand to create a new virtual pledge card that we could use to activate giving with the highest possible level of personalization, while also working hand in hand with marketing to make sure that the messaging was tied in perfectly, because clarity is key in this virtual world. I'm going to ask Lindsay to pull up the pledge card now so you guys can see an image of it, and we're happy to share it. But what's so unique about this seemingly simple pledge card is that it had ability for two-way personalization. So we could send via text and email a donor or prospect's individual giving history with a personal ask, and they could send it back to us the same way, personalized via email and text. This functionality did not exist in our system before and has application for us and flexibility beyond this event. And that's really the advice that I would give you. If you're going to invest in something new on the technology side, don't just think about what do I need for this specific event. Think bigger to make sure that it has the flexibility. Lindsay, you can take it off, it's fine. Make sure that it has the flexibility that you can apply it beyond, because our resources are limited and we need to be frugal with them. I also want to say that the 3 pillars here of marketing, technology, and development, we had to know enough about each other's worlds when we were developing this to know how far we could push each other, just far enough. But I couldn't ask for, I had to understand enough about technology to know that what I was asking for was even doable. And we had to, from the program content to the user experience to how data flowed, we had to keep our eyes on the process from end to end. And that meant we couldn't just be experts about our own little worlds. We had to see how it impacted the world just before us and just after us. If we stuck to our silo, it was never going to happen. Final words on the technology piece is that we're often used to our technology colleagues just doing the back end pieces, pledge entry, operations, analytics. And more, we're seeing that technology is my first call from the beginning. We need them there at the front end, working closely with campaign and marketing to figure out how we're going to do our work best. And finally, to have confidence in this new system, there's 2 keys. Test, and make sure that you create an ongoing feedback loop so that every time you test something, we're learning and tweaking and getting smarter.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Abby, and I so appreciate that. When Mimi, unfortunately isn't able to join us, you immediately like, well, I could jump in and, because again, this is a team and this is an organization that sings together, that knows each other, that laughs together, that cries together, and actually work-wise, like, each other's work and sort of who to call, when to call, how to integrate. Given the time frame, what I would love to do is, Abby and Bonnie, I'd love for you guys to take us home right now on the integration, really
Sure.
around what Sophie had sort of framed for us with ultimate concern.
Absolutely.
Is that okay? Can we,
Absolutely.
in terms of how with the development and the donor experience and what Abby sort of and Jeff and team, sort of feed to you, Bonnie, and all your experience, what are the do's and don'ts around creating sort of that ultimate concern and that cogent program that compels giving?
Sure. Son, if I can just say one thing, and then I'm going to pass it on to you.
Sure.
Okay. So I just wanted to say on the development side, first, this was our women's event, and I have to thank Ophie Osen-Cohen, who's our incredible women's philanthropy director, and her leadership team. We're talking about implications for all of Federation, but if I didn't say thank you to her, I mean, she's just our hero. And really on the development piece, what we learned in this virtual world is that it's just the basics, right? The key fundraising tenets that worked in a regular ballroom are exactly what you need in a virtual ballroom. You have to engage leadership. You have to have personalized recruitment strategies. You have to pre-solicit, and you have to have customer service, which is essentially donor stewardship, which we heard from Ari, that showed that we knew what we were talking to. And Bonnie, I'm going to pass it to you. I know we're short on time, but that's really the back to basics piece and the donor stewardship I needed to mention.
Great, thank you.
So on the production side, what's really important is to find outside partners and marry them to your internal team. Great vendors are critical in this. There are tons of freelancers, online talent, stock photographers. You do not need to work with people that are in your neighborhood or around the corner. You can reach out across the globe. As a matter of fact, the video of Vanessa the Poet was actually shot in New York in a green screen. I edited it on Zoom and directed it on Zoom and brought it back to Miami to edit. Ideas are many, but executable ideas are few. And so you really have to test to see if an idea can be executed well. And if it can, scale up for it. And if it can't, abandon it really and go on to the next thing. You have to focus on the continuity of your program. When you're dealing with a program this large, people can get lost in this virtual world. continuity is really important. Vanessa created a chill when you watched the poem. You really need to find moments that create what I call a chill factor. You need to bring your audience up and down throughout your entire program. And if it doesn't excite you, it's not going to excite your audience. And you want to use as much pre-recorded content as possible. We heard that before. But there still needs to be a live element to the program. You have to be able to account for technology difficulties, and you have to be able to pivot and address the most recent issue of the day. Most of the pre-recorded content will be in the can 2 to 3 weeks in advance. And if something happens, you look ridiculous if you can't respond to it. You want to write segments that are no longer than 3 minutes and write to an average pace of 130 words per minute. Don't try and get 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. It's just not going to work. You want to avoid talking heads on the program throughout. You're not just moving the ballroom stage onto the small screen. I mean, that is not possible. You really are writing now for a program and creating for a virtual experience. It's very easy in this virtual world. As we've all seen, there's an average of a 30% drop off on every virtual program. We saw it ourselves on our program. And people don't have to weave through tables to exit a ballroom. There's no sense of embarrassment. In 2 seconds, if you haven't engaged them, they're gone and nobody else knows it. You said before that there's no silver bullet. I would actually argue, Andrea, that virtual is much harder. That we know how to do it in a ballroom. This is a much heavier lift with a much higher production value that people are really looking for. And when you heard before about a lot of content, there is a lot of content. There's just not a lot of good content. And we need to lead in that area as federations. Just like the best practices we put in place before COVID in fundraising are relevant, and we led in that area, we need to lead in the area of content development. No matter how great everything else is, if you're not going right into the mind's eye of the person watching it creatively, you're not going to grab them. And I reference what a copywriting teacher once told me many years ago, and I know you love this, that in this moment, if we really challenge ourselves with creativity in this medium as a broadcast medium, we can build 10,000-foot whipped cream mountains, fly a plane over it, and drop a cherry on top. And we've actually done nothing but created that story in the mind's eye of the person watching. So that's critical. We've got to think big. The times really demand it. And our shared mission really deserves nothing less.
Yeah, amen to that. Amen. Okay, so what this was a little bit of a promo, because I really think we have to bring some of our panelists back for a deeper dive. So we could really unpack what's going on. Again, this is an emerging arena. We're all co-creating together, learning together. This is about federations. This is about Jewish community at large, all the different organizations that are represented right now. And we are so appreciative to be on this learning journey with you. Thank you for taking time with us today. And again, the start of a very fruitful, robust practice conversation, and we'll all get better and knock this out of the park together. So have a
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you, JFNA, and thank you, David Brown, for everything.
Great work, team. Thank you, Andrea. Signing off.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for being here. Thanks, Andrea.